All right, let's get back to contract stuff. A couple of things I think I passed over that I want to make sure that I touch on with you tonight. I would much rather, that's what you got to do. You got to get a teenager if you need tech stuff done. You really do. No, I don't have a problem. That's fine. That'd be fine. I appreciate that. Any help that you can offer to the classmates, I appreciate that. I'll make sure they get it. You keep me posted, Jen, and I'll make sure they get it. I made pork chops the other night. I did a fine job. My wife's a vegetarian, but she's not like a militant vegetarian, Like I'll be cooking on the grill and she'll go, damn, this smells good. I would never eat it, but boy, that smells good. Anyway. All right, when we were talking about breach of contract, I don't think I mentioned this concept to you, and I really need to. Just as I was looking over my notes. The concept is liquidated damages. That's the term, right? Make sure you get that one in your brain. Liquidated damages. What I'm about to tell you applies to any kind of contract, okay? Not just real estate contracts.
Is this is this the red book, right? I'm sorry.
No, we're in the yellow book.
Oh, okay.
We're in the yellow book. Hold on.
What page?
I'm looking.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm in unit 11, right?
93.
11.
197 is liquidated damages.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll make a note too. All right, when we're talking about breach of contract, we talked about how people can get, actual damages, right? How much they lost on this deal, and people could get specific performance, right? An order of the court that they got to go through with the deal. Well, there's also a concept called liquidated damages that you need to know. Liquidated damages in any kind of contract is an amount agreed to by the parties up front. That's intended to compensate the in this case, the seller, in case the buyer breaches the contract. Right? Sometimes knowing the actual damages is hard to do. So what we do is we agree on an amount at the start of the contract that if the buyer blows this deal, the seller's going to get this. In any contract, okay? Because listen, I'm telling you, I think there's a test question, if I'm not mistaken, that says, what are liquidated damages or something like that? And the answers are all about real estate, most of them. But it's not a real estate question, because the question is, what are liquidated damages, not what are liquidated damages in a real estate contract, okay? But that's where we'll focus, obviously. So it's an amount agreed to up front by the parties that's meant to compensate the seller in most cases if the buyer breaches. The thing about liquidated damages is they have to be based in reality, okay? They cannot be punitive, as the law says. So you can't have a liquidated damages clause on a contract that's worth 50 grand that says if the seller breaches or if the buyer breaches, they're going to owe the seller $10 million, right? It's got to be based in some sort of reality. It's not to be punitive. In a real estate contract, it's the amount of the deposit. Okay, and I don't know if I mentioned this term before, so let me run it by you. So it's the amount of the deposit, which might also be called earnest money. Right, sometimes you see the deposit referred to as earnest money. that in a real estate contract, that's what happens if the buyer breaches a contract without cause, right, for no good reason. I forgot to do this before, so I apologize. Don't worry about actually answering it. I just got to make sure I get it up there. All right. All right, you all right with that? It's going to come in handy here in a minute.
In what situations you would not have to pay for the liquidated damages? You said it has to be a good reason.
All right, so let's see. So what's contemplated here, right, as we discuss the concept of liquidated damages, what's contemplated is if the buyer backs out of the deal for no good reason. Right, so if the buyer backs out of the deal, like the example I think we used last time, was they enter into a contract to buy the house, and then, they find their dream house the next week, right? And so they want to back out of this deal. That's not a good reason. That's the kind of circumstance that would give rise to a breach of contract and the payment of damages. Now, there are some things happen sometimes. There's a good reason why the buyer backs out of the deal, like they can't get financing. Right, and in that kind of circumstance, they might well not lose their deposit. So that's liquidated damage.
So what about, let's say, appraisal doesn't come as high? Can the buyer still back out without losing deposit?
Probably not. And I say that because there's an agreed upon purchase price. And that's the agreed upon purchase price. And if the appraisal comes back not where they thought it was going to be, too bad. You already agreed to the purchase price, right? Which is a serious problem, no question. But it happens.
So let's say it's a $300,000 contractual price,
right?
And the appraisal comes at $220,000. So a buyer is liable for that $75,000 difference.
Mm-hmm.
Is that usually happens?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, that's a problem. It's a problem because what we're going to learn at some point, is the lender will lend the lesser of the purchase price or the appraised value. So you could have a contract for $300,000, the appraisal comes back at, we'll just say 2.25 or whatever. The lender is only going to lend on the 2.25, not $300,000, which means you got to come up with the extra $75,000 to close the deal.
Okay.
And that's a problem. Well, nonetheless. All right. So that's the concept of liquidated damages. Let me give you a couple of other terms that I just want to run through. Okay, I think we've talked about various types of contracts. That's fine. We talked a little bit about the contract form, and I think that's where I left off, right? We talked a little bit about the unauthorized practice of law. We talked about how it's okay for you to fill in blanks. That's fine. That's not the unauthorized practice of law. That's just, adjacent to whatever it is you do for a living. So it's not the unauthorized practice of law. But as soon as you start crossing stuff out and saying, oh, that's not applicable here, and as soon as you start interpreting contract terms for your client, then you kind of cross the line. All right. The sales contract itself, which I have a copy of right here, and we'll talk about the terms in a moment, is often used as an offer sheet. In other words, the buyer will fill out this contract and put a number in when it comes to how much the purchase price is going to be, right? That's how much they're willing to pay. And they'll send that to the seller. If the seller agrees to that price, they'll sign off on a contract, and then we got to sign contract. If the seller does not agree to that purchase price, maybe they'll put together their own contract, right? And put their purchase price in here, send that back to the buyer. The buyer agrees to that. They sign the contract. Now we got a fully signed contract by both sides. So the idea is this purchase contract is often used to make an offer, right? And then if that offer is accepted, we have a fully signed contract, done deal. In my earlier example about how the buyer finds their dream house or whatever, and they want back out of the deal, the buyer can, you should write this down, buyer can withdraw their offer anytime before it's accepted. Okay, even if there's a clause that says like you can accept or reject within 10 days or whatever, anytime before it's accepted, it can be withdrawn. Oops. Hang on 1 second, please. Hold on, let's give me a sec. All right. Your book says, so I guess it's worth mentioning, right, that once you get a signed contract, everybody gets a copy of it, and we're good to go. All right, another term for you before we get to the contract itself. The term binder, you may have heard that, or hear that frequently in an insurance context. A binder is just a short form contract. I don't think in residential real estate that we use binders all that frequently. But understand, that's the point, right? It's not this full-blown contract that you just got a little peek at there. It's just a shorter form of that contract. Right, we've also talked about the term earnest money, right, which is also the deposit. Again, I just want to make sure that you've got that term down. You have seen that just in case it shows up on the test. If they say earnest money, that means the deposit. Now, that deposit, as I said, also serves as liquidated damages, right? So in real life, the seller wants as big a deposit as they can possibly get so that the buyer is discouraged from looking at other properties and finding that dream house at the last possible moment or whatever, right? Because if the buyer knows that they're going to lose a ton of money if they back out of this deal, then they won't back out of the deal. So the seller is going to look for the biggest deposit they can possibly get, right? Conversely, the buyer is going to look for the lowest deposit they can possibly give, right? For that circumstance that if they should find their dream house next week, then they can back out of this deal and buy that house. Again, the deposit money, the earnest money serves as liquidated damages in a real estate contract. This used to be on my test. I don't know if it is anymore, but because I don't think it's that big a deal. Equitable title. Here's all you need to know about the concept of equitable title. When a purchase and sale contract is fully executed by both parties, right? Both parties have signed off on the contract. The buyer has certain rights in that property. They may even have enough rights in that property to get their own insurance policy on that property in case it burns down before the closing. Okay, so equitable title, what that refers to is rights acquired by the buyer once there's a signed contract in place. Hold on. All right. Hold on, drop my napkin. Hold on. Go ahead.
Is this a form of insurance for a buyer?
Say again?
So this equitable title, what is that? What is that? Why is the buyer?
It refers to the fact that once there's a signed contract, even though the closing hasn't taken place yet, the buyer gets certain rights in that property. So, the nature of those rights, don't even worry about it.
Okay.
All right, I think that's all I got to worry about here. I'll give you one more. This is another contract concept that may or may not be wholly applicable in this circumstance. Risk of loss. Whose problem is it if the property burns to the ground? Generally speaking, it remains the seller's problem, right? And then the property is destroyed, deposit goes back, deal is off. So, again, this is more of a bigger picture contract question than just real estate. So who bears risk of loss? Just by way of example as to when it really matters. Let's say I buy something on Amazon, right? And the truck in which my box is being held, whatever, catches fire and everything in the box is destroyed. Whose problem is that? Is it my problem? Do I still have to pay? Or is it Amazon's problem, such that they got to replace it? All right, so that's the question. Who bears risk of loss? Generally speaking, seller bears risk of loss. However, because the buyer has equitable title, they may be able to get insurance on the property.
Mark, what about when you let somebody move their belongings into the house?
And that's really the issue, right? Whose problem is it then? And the answer is, if the place burns down, you better have insurance on your stuff. All right. Let's look at the contract. Whoa. Much. This is a standard form real estate contract. As far as I can tell, sorry, give me a second. As far as I can tell, this is the most updated version of the standard form real estate contract that is out there. I did a little bit of looking around today, and I think this is the most recent version that's out there. As you can see, this is the Greater Hartford Association of Realtors. This is their standard form contract. In other places, it's pretty much the same. All right, so let's take a look at some of the terms just so you know what you're dealing with. And again, you will become fully familiar with this as you go through your career or whatever. But at this point, I'm sorry, somebody had a question. Oh, never mind. Let's at least make you familiar with some of the terms of the contract. All right. So, the parties. Simple enough, right? Who's the buyer? Who's the seller? And you know what I'm going to say, right? Because I say it every time. Make sure you got their freaking names right. Make sure you got the spelling correct. If there's a junior in there, make sure you got the junior part correct. If there, whatever, right? So make sure that you got the proper names. Make sure you got the proper spelling. Maybe his name is Charles, and his wife calls him Chuck, and his mama calls him Pookie. Make sure that you got the right names in the contract. Make that go away. It's just not. Same thing holds for the seller. All right, look, this is the document that I'm going to base everything on when I have to put together the loan documents, when I have to put together the other contractual documents that go along here. So I'm going to rely on this. And so I want to make sure you got it right. Okay, so make sure you got it right. So simple enough. Buyer and seller, make sure you got all the pertinent information noted properly. In this case, number 2, property. All I need is a street address. Just make sure it's, the proper street address. I mentioned to you previously about how I did a title search on the wrong property because they had renumbered the properties or whatever. Just kind of bear that in mind as you go through. It's certainly worth asking. All right. So far, so good? Everybody okay? All right. Then we come down here, fixtures and personal property, right? Fixtures, things that are so attached to the property that they become real property. So I have except as stated below, all fixtures are included, right? And personal property is excluded. So here's inclusions and exclusions. There's a separate contractual form that deals with what's included and what's excluded. Right? If there's anything particular that we got to know about, that shed in the back, the above ground pool, my man cave, garage, whatever, right? You got to put that stuff in here. Now, what you need to be cautious of, okay, is when we say personal property is included, and we want to talk about things like the patio furniture or whatever, okay? You got to be very cautious about that because the bank is not going to lend $300,000 against patio furniture. Okay, so if we're going to talk about personal property being included, we're going to talk about substantial property like, appliances and things of that nature. And so you got to be a little careful about that because there are times where this will get submitted to the bank for approval for a loan and they'll go, nope, not taking it. Not if we're not lending against the patio furniture and the above ground pool and all that other nonsense. Right? So just be careful.
So if there is an underground pool, do we still write that in or try not to?
That can be done if we want to deal with personal property of that nature, right? Just the stuff like the patio furniture stuff. That can be done by separate document, and we can do a bill of sale for that. Okay? And that's fine, but that's done separate. That's not right because we're going to handle that separately outside of the closing. It's not going to be part of this closing. Okay. All right. So let's talk about price issues. Hold on. Shake and bake, good stuff. All right. All right, easy enough. The price is whatever the price is. Right, straight up price term. Got to be accurate. All the nonsense we talked about already. All right, now let's take a look at the specifics of these provisions, right? So if there's a deposit with this contract, that deposit with this contract is usually a very small amount, $100.
There's a newspaper fee in the neighborhood.
Why do you think that is?
Processing?
No.
There has to be a value, right?
No.
That they're really interested?
No. Consideration, people. Consideration is what makes a contract, right? It's that give and take. You got to give up something of value. You got to get something of value. So we give you $100, and if the seller then signs off on this contract, or buy, yes, because this would be a buyer type thing. If the seller signs off on a contract, then we have consideration, and this contract will stick. It will be suable, right? And then, if they accept, we'll make the rest of the deposit, right? Which is maybe 10%, let's say, whatever, right? And so we've got a certain amount of days in order to do that, to make the rest of that deposit if it's accepted by the seller. Does that make sense? Okay. If there is going to be seller financing, that's addressed right here, right? Seller will take back a purchase money note and mortgage. I'll tell you about purchase money stuff later. When just this term right here, purchase money note and mortgage, that's a legal term. And it has to do with circumstances where the person that you're buying stuff from provides the financing as well for you to buy that stuff. And it may give them certain rights in that property. So that's got to be addressed. Okay. If they're assuming the mortgage, that gets on here as well, right? And few mortgages are assumable these days, but mortgages that are backed by the Veterans Administration, VA loans, those are pretty much assumable. So it could very well happen here. All right. And here's how much they're going to bring to the closing. Oh, I'm sorry. This is how much mortgage they're going to get. I apologize. So this is the mortgage amount. And then the balance that they're going to have to come into the closing with. And all of those numbers should add up to this number. You're rarely, I would think, you're rarely going to have sellers taking back financing. That could happen, like if you got a new subdivision, you got a developer who's trying to get rid of the property, they may be willing to provide some financing in the deal. So that should be in there.
Do you find that when you're selling it to a family member, you might see something like that?
Mm-hmm. I say that with this caveat. Yes, you might see that. If you're an idiot, don't do that. Never do business with family. Go out and get your own mortgage. Dana, do you have a question? I see you're unmuted. That's the only reason I asked. All right. All right. So that's
Must have been an accident.
No problem. Always happy to have you involved. That's fine. All right. Okay, so that's how we deal with the price terms. So I got a little deposit up front to make sure that the contract sticks if the seller signs off on it. I got the balance of the deposit that has to be paid within a certain amount of time if the seller does in fact sign on it. We got to deal with how much of a mortgage they're going to get and then how much they got to bring to the closing. Okay, so far so good. And as you can see down the bottom here, sorry, everybody initials down here. All right. Whoa, sorry. You see that okay? Okay. And here's about the mortgage stuff. Now, the only thing that we're really concerned about here is you want to make certain, if you're a seller, right, you want to make certain that the buyer is getting appropriate institutional financing and not some kind of a wacky deal that maybe is going to fall through for them. So we want to make certain that we've got really conventional sort of mortgage terms, right? So that's what all this stuff is about. So we'll be looking for conventional stuff, right? How much, the interest rates and all that kind of thing. This is very important because if they can't get that, then it's probably a decent reason to get out of the contract, but it's subject to us arguing about it. I don't want to have an argument about whether or not the buyer's going to get their deposit money back. That's all I need about that. This right here, deposit and escrow deposit, that's the IORTA stuff that we were talking about before. It says that once that initial deposit is made, so here's a couple things just for your knowledge, okay? Don't panic when I tell you about it. So this is IORTA amounts. Right, when it says it goes into escrow, that's what that means. It means it goes into the not my money account. That's an escrow account. Bear this in mind. Don't let it panic you. If there's a fight over whether or not the buyer is going to get their deposit back, you are going to be sued, okay? But you're not going to be sued because you did anything wrong or whatever. You're sued because you're the person that holds the money. And so we're seeking a court order to order you as to who gets the money. Right? You don't have anything to say about this deal. As I said, it's not like you did anything wrong. You just have to be a party to this lawsuit so that when there's a court order that says who you have to pay that money or over to, that it's there and you're part of that. Okay? It's called you being a stakeholder. Again, it's got nothing to do with you having done anything wrong or any such thing, but you're a party to the suit just so that when there's an order to pay over that money, you're subject to that order. You pay the money wherever the court tells you to pay it.
And since we're employed by the broker, would the broker actually be the one?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's their account and they're the stakeholder.
Okay.
Right? But since you were their designee, as we say in my field, you'll be part of that as well. Don't panic. Damn it. Mommy just got home. Dog's very happy. Okay. All right. So as you can see, right, the closing will take place on, and there's a date right here. Remember, as we talked about, every contract has built within its terms a reasonable amount of time to do the closing. So this date right here is not an absolute 100% drop dead date. Okay, there's a reasonable amount of time after that date to do the closing. So if it gets delayed on that day by a couple of days, whatever, no big deal. If it gets to be a little too long, and you'll know when it gets to be a little too long, then we might want to execute an extension agreement on this contract. Okay, but for the most part, as I said, you got a reasonable amount of time after that drop dead date in order to complete this transaction. And as you can see, it's held at the buyer's attorney's office. Okay, and that's negotiable. The reason for the buyer's attorney office is this. Keep this in your brain. Go to the money. That's where the money is. The buyer's lawyer is the one that has the cash. Go to the cash. Right now, again, this is negotiable, right? Did I ever tell you this? I don't know if I did. I had a closing one time where the lawyer said, you know, I work out of my house, whatever, but there's a conference room at the library. So let's go to the library and we'll do the closing in the library. Okay, I don't have a problem with that. We get to the library, somebody's in a conference room, we can't have the conference room. Now what are we going to do? All right, I have done closings on the trunk of cars. That's fine, not that big a deal. But this was not going to work for this. So at that time, I was teaching real estate, as it turns out. No, I didn't feed her, no. All right. Anyway, I was teaching real estate at a school that was fairly close to that library. I said, well, let's go there. So we went into the classroom at the school where I was teaching. It was a real estate class, so we got all of my students in there, the real estate class, and I did the closing there. So, you know, the whereabouts of the closing, not that big a deal. It's negotiable. Okay. This says that, there you go. It's anticipated that at the time of the closing, the buyers are going to be able to move into the property, right? They're going to take possession of the property at the closing or after the closing, as the case may be, right? And that it will be in broom clean condition. And at that point, the buyer bears risk of loss. Now, if we're in a circumstance where the seller cannot get out of the property, because they have their new house hasn't closed yet, or they're moving the week after to out of state, whatever the case. We can work a deal where they can stay there as long as we can, right? And then the sellers become renters in their own home, right? Or the home that they just sold. And if you're going to rent the property from me, you're paying me, right? Listen, I had to borrow this money today. And I got to start paying interest on this money today. You're going to stay in that house and you're going to pay me back the interest that I have to pay. And you're going to pay me back the taxes that I have to pay for the time that you were in that property. And you're going to pay me for the oil that you use to heat the house while you're living in it and such, okay? So that it's certainly not going to necessarily break the deal, but it's something I need to know up front. Okay. Oops, sorry. No, right here, right? Title. Seller will transfer fee simple, right? Fee simple, absolute. The highest, best quality title that you can possibly get. That's what the seller is going to transfer to the buyer. Okay? You with me so far? Everybody okay? Adjustments. Sandra, come back to me, babe. Adjustments right here. That's what we were just doing in math. adjustments for taxes, association fees, rent, water, fire taxes, sewer, interest, etc. Right? All that proration stuff that we were just talking about in the math section, that's what this deals with. Right? So now when your client goes, adjustments, what are you talking about adjustments? You can go, what do you want to know? If you paid the taxes and there's proration and you got adjustments a couple days for whatever. Okay? All right, no, default and liquidated damages. We just got done talking about liquidated damages, right? If the buyer defaults and the seller's not in default, any deposit will be paid over and retained by the seller as liquidated damages. Okay, there's our liquidated damages provision. In the real estate contract, it's the amount of the deposit. Okay. And if the seller defaults and the buyer's not in default, then the buyer can do all of those things that we talked about last time, right? And sue for damages, right? Amounts that they had to put out, amounts that they're out because the seller backed out of the deal. They can sue for specific performance to get a court order for them to sell the property to the buyer as anticipated, whatever. Okay. And at least with respect to the purchase and sale of this piece of real estate, this is the complete agreement. There's no side deals. There's no wink, wink, nudge, nudge stuff going on. There's no other contracts out there, right? The exception to that, if you will, is that if we have a separate agreement for the purchase and sale of some personal property, that's fine, and that's not a violation of this provision. It's not assignable. Right? Remember, we talked about assignment of a contract as being able to, as one method by which a contract is terminated. Well, and I said, right, if I contracted with you because I did my due diligence on you and I trust you and I know you and you're going to be the one that gets the mortgage or whatever. I don't want you to assign it to your kid or your mama or your sister or whatever. Right? I did the deal with you. You can't just assign your rights under this contract to somebody else. Right? Remember, assignment, transferring your rights under the contract to a third party. This contract is not assignable. Now, it's not assignable without the written consent of the seller. So, if you want to assign, let's say that you did not take my fine advice and create a limited liability company and just leave it hanging out there in case you saw a piece of property that you liked. And then you found this piece of property. You signed off on the contract. And then you went, oh, crap, I got to form a limited liability company and transfer my rights to this limited liability company. Maybe you can get the written consent of the seller under those circumstances to transfer the rights, assign your rights under this contract to an entity solely owned, wholly owned by you. Okay, make sense? Make sense? Is there anyone to whom that does not make sense? Okay. All right. Survival we'll talk more about later. Equal housing. Ooh, boy, Connecticut. You need equal housing language in this contract. Very important. Okay. So that's just non-discrimination stuff. All right, now we get to inspections. Home, pest, and environmental inspections. So this is what gives the buyer the right to do all the stuff they need to do, right? The bank's going to want a home inspection, so the buyer needs to spend that $350 for nothing, but they need to do it. They're going to want to get a termite inspection because the bank's going to want that too, right? The bank's going to want to protect their collateral. Maybe they're going to want to get a mold test. Maybe they're going to want to get a radon test. All that stuff is provided for in here. My only comment to you is you see where you got to get it done by a certain time. I'm sure that your firm will have some sort of policy on what that time should be. You got to make sure that there's enough time to get these things done, right? As we talked about with I don't think we've talked about it yet, with a radon inspection. You don't just like go in there with a Q-tip and swab the walls and get a radon inspection, right? There's a unit that you got to put in the basement, and it's got to be in the basement for a certain amount of time, and then you got to mail it off to the radon people, and they come back with a report and such, and that takes a while. So you got to make certain that you build in sufficient time to make sure that all these inspections can happen, and you can make your requests of the buyer to fix things that need fixing. Okay, and here's some of the types of things that you can ask for, right? You got a home inspection, termite inspection, radon inspection, mold inspection, any other type of inspection you could possibly think of that your buyer is concerned about. Okay, so far so good? Everybody okay? All right. Riders. A rider is an attachment to the contract. And so we're going to look at a couple of riders here in a moment. So here's what we got, right? Attorney approval. Oh, that's my favorite one. Remember I told you that, you guys do this whole contract deal, and by the time it hits my desk, it's too late for me to do anything about it. If it's a crappy contract or if there's some terms that maybe I'm not in agreement with or whatever the case, right? Some legal things that I have some difficulty with. So you can build that in here. Anybody know what a perk pit test is? I have no clue what that is. I gotta look it up now.
Perk test is for septic tanks.
Oh yeah? Oh, that makes sense now. Yeah, okay. That makes perfect sense.
You can't put a septic tank in it.
Oh yeah, look. Well, there's septic and well over there. So that makes perfect sense. Anyway. All right. So if you're going to do any of this stuff, you need any of that stuff, right? If it's a condo unit, then it's got a separate addendum, separate rider to the contract that goes. If the seller's taking back financing, then that's attached here as well so that we can take a look at it, see what the deal is, so on. All right. Oh, I'm sorry. All right. Remember we talked about property condition disclosure report, and I said that you got to have in the hands of the buyer the property condition disclosure report before there is an offer made on this property, and that's what this says, right? Or they get $500. There's also an affidavit that says that they've got to have working. An affidavit has to be provided, I believe, at closing that says there's working carbon monoxide and smoke detectors in the property. If there's not, or if they don't want to sign that affidavit, that's fine. Cost you $250 at closing. Okay, so if you think that through, if you've got a seller who doesn't want to say a thing about the condition of this property, right? They don't want to do the property condition disclosure report. It's an as-is deal. I'm not telling you anything. You do your due diligence. They have every right in the world to do that. It's going to cost them $500. They don't want to talk about, in addition, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. Fine, cost you another $250. So really, for $750, that's the price of doing business. You don't have to say a thing about that property, not one word, right? It's entirely up to the buyer to do their own due diligence. All right, look, we talked about this, right? List of hazardous waste sites. You don't have to tell them where they are. You have to tell them where to go to find out. Here it is, Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Right? We've also talked about lists of hunting and shooting activities. You don't have to tell them where they are. You got to tell them where to go. A list of local properties on which to take place at the town clerk's office. That's what you got to tell them. Hold on, Rose.
Is it me that you're breaking up for, or is it for someone else too?
I can't address that. Am I okay, everybody? I'm good? Okay, I'm just clear. All right, you and us.
Okay, so
I'll talk slower.
I'm getting connection issues. All right, no worries.
It happens. It happens. I'll talk slower.
No, you're fine.
All right, well testing. There you go. And look, we talked about this too, right? Execution by electronic methods. And again, you got to get the consent up front. There's the consent up front. Okay, if they don't want to do, I have to caution you though, if they don't want to do this, and I don't have a problem with anybody who doesn't want to do this. This is a big deal. And if they don't want to do this, and I caution you against doing what I just did. That's for me to do. Okay? I might not have a problem with you doing something like, Leo, with you doing something like refused. I might be okay with that. Okay, because I don't think that's you. I think that's them, and that's okay. All right. All right, here's the Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. Here's the brokers, and done deal. Okay, this is not brain surgery by any stretch. Right? There's a couple of things we talked about that you got to be a little concerned about, but there's, again, this is not brain surgery. You'll be fine. All right, so that's the real estate contract in and of itself. Let me talk to you a little bit about amendments and addendums. There's our girl, Jody. I had to look it up, Patricia. I know you did. I had to look it up, but you're absolutely right. You knew that, right? She sued, and they settled, and the lawyer wouldn't give a statement except to say she can go pick out whatever car she wants. So I think we have some idea of how it settled. And you know why it settled? Because they realized that this was an this is a unilateral contract, right? And you can't play games like that. Now, the Hooters people, who, of course, Hooters being what they are inherently trustworthy, said that, no, this was just a big April Fool's joke. Ha ha, you lose. All right, anyway. So here's some examples of addendums. This is a list that you'll have access to of all the stuff that's staying and all the stuff that's going. Okay, remember, like day one, I talked about fixtures. And I talked about how you had to be smart enough to ask, hey, is that chandelier going with you? What about that ceiling fan? Are you leaving that behind? And so on. Right? Again, what if it's a nice Italian family who obviously has a second kitchen in the basement? Are they taking all of those appliances with them? Right? That leaves us with appliances in the kitchen. But what about the other appliances? All right. So anyway, you gotta address all that. And this will at least help you to go through that. All right, so long as you're smart enough to remember to do this. Wait. All right, this is the condominium rider or condominium addendum or whatever they call it that we talked about before, right? And this contains the provisions that say, we understand that we've got to get a resale certificate. Remember, we talked about resale certificates. And the resale certificate contains representations with respect to the right of first refusal having been complied with, that their condo fees have been paid up to date, that there's no outstanding assessments, nothing's coming up that we're not aware of, and so on. Okay, so that goes into the contract as well. Everybody good? Yeah, please. Go ahead. Here, take the whole deal. Warm it up. You're going to have to warm it up. Yeah, I know. You're going to have to warm it up, I just said. Here's the short answer. You're going to get to the closing, and there's going to be a big fight. And they're going to go, oh, yeah, we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. They're never going to do it. Okay? I will tell you this. This is my personal experience. Please take it for what it's worth. Your experience may vary. Once you walk away from the closing table, any agreements that you have with respect to what's going to happen after, forget about it. It's never going to happen. Right? Whatever's done before closing. So I think if they leave a bunch of crap behind, right? I can remember when we moved into South Road, they had this big, ugly-ass mirror on the wall. And I went, what's up with that? And the guy went, oh, you can have that. No, that's not the point. I don't want that. Right. So you have every right to delay the closing until they get their stuff out or take your chances later. It's a crappy answer, but it's the answer. Okay. There's a mold disclosure form right there. One more. And there's the extension agreement that we talked about. As I said, there's a reasonable time to complete the deal after the drop dead date. And if it gets to be unreasonable, then maybe we want to execute this extension agreement. Right? And I can tell you that, at least in my opinion and in my experience, it's more likely that you'll do an extension agreement than the deal will die. Right, because look, it's the sunk cost, right? We're both in this thing way too deep now to say, all right, we've got to wait a couple extra days to get your mortgage documents in. Fine, we'll just do that, right? Rather than have to start all over again. So again, if you get into that circumstance where, as I said, and if you look here, right, there's some inspection stuff, right? You couldn't get the inspector out in time. You want to extend those dates, etc. So it's a valuable form. It's a good thing for you to use. Okay. And just so that you're aware, put this over here. Hang on. There's my stuff. Lost all my written work. There we go. We're going to talk more about this again in a different context, but let me run it by you right now. There we go. An amendment to a contract is something that changes the contract. Read what I mean. Why did I type that twice, you think? Change. Okay, that's what I meant to do. An amendment to a contract is something that changes the contract. An addendum is just an addition to the contract. Okay, I don't get too hot and bothered about that, but like just in case you're ever on Jeopardy. All right, we've talked about the property condition disclosure report, particularly. Okay, we'll let that go. Get a new box. There's a question on a test about this, and I never talk about it right, so I'm going to try it this time. Options. An option agreement. This is what you need to know. An option agreement is a separate contract. It's a contract in and of itself. Remember I said to you that a contract can be withdrawn anytime before it's accepted, right? So if the buyer makes an offer and the seller sits on it, the buyer can say, forget it, I don't want to do this anymore, right? Even if there's like a 10-day period, right? If the buyer says, you got 10 days to accept or reject my offer, and 2 days goes by, the buyer can go, never mind, I'm withdrawing. They can withdraw at any time. So far, so good. If the seller wants to keep that 10-day period open and available to them, then that's a separate contract called an option. And a separate contract requires separate consideration. So if they cut a deal where the seller says, I don't know, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you $500. You leave the offer open for 10 days. That's a contract. That's an option. Okay? And in that case, the buyer, cannot withdraw the offer. Right? They are contractually obligated to leave it open for the full 10 days. That's an option contract. Okay? You may well see this again, I'm pretty sure. All right, last thing we want to discuss in this chapter, I think, hold on. Oh, yes, I'm done. The last thing we want to talk about, just briefly, is owner financing. That's circumstance, as I said previously, right, where the owner provides the financing to the buyer. Excuse me. So if the buyer is unable to secure financing for this deal, maybe the owner is sitting in pretty good financial condition and they say, okay, tell you what, we own the property outright. There's no mortgage on the property right now. We own the property outright. We'll sell it to you for $200,000, right? You cut a note and mortgage to me rather than to the bank. That's how seller financing works. Okay?
Would that be like a rent to own?
No, this is straight up ownership. I'll give you legal title. I'll give you title to the property today. I'll give you fee simple title right now. Just as if you had gone to the bank to get that loan, right? Except I'm the bank. I'm the bank, but I'm also the seller. I'm going to tell you some real legalese right here, okay? Stand by. I'm going to give you some real legalese, and I want you to at least keep it in the back of your brain because it's going to come back, okay? The owner, the original owner, the seller owner retains legal title. The buyer gets equitable title that we talked about before. Oops, sorry. That's what gives the buyer the right to move in. Shoot. Sorry about that. It's also what gives the original owner the right to foreclose on the property if you don't pay. Now, what I just told you, we used in the context of owner financing, right? But it's the same deal with bank financing. Bank gets legal title to the property, the buyer gets equitable title to the property. And if you don't pay, then the bank can foreclose, which we'll be doing next chapter or thereabouts.
Are they subject to using specific tax rates and all that, or interest rates?
No.
No, they can charge whatever they want.
They can. I can tell you there are certain limitations that we'll talk about, but not many. And I can tell you that if you're doing this with your mama, and your mama says, "Don't worry, I'm not going to pay you. You don't have to pay me interest," the IRS thinks differently. The IRS will impute interest to your mama as income, even if you don't pay it.
Okay. Thank you.
This is what we just talked about, by the way. Hold on one second. Well, one second.
Yeah.
This is what we call a purchase money deal, purchase money mortgage. Okay, it's a circumstance where the seller provides the money to the buyer. I'll tell you where. Go ahead, Anas, then I'll come back.
No, I was just going to ask. So, IRS forces you to forces the owner to collect interest.
Well,
It forces the
no.
amount of interest.
No, but it will force it will force the owner to pay income tax on a rate of interest. Right? So they will impute interest to the owner
Ooh.
at what I guess are market rate. I suppose at market rates, right?
Okay. All right.
This is called purchase money mortgage or purchase money financing. Again, it's where the seller provides the financing to the buyer. Now, let me tell you where else we find purchase money mortgages and purchase money financing, because it's going to come back to you. Let's say I had this case one time. We'll go here. Let's say that I go down to Zales, the diamond store, to buy my darling a nice Valentine's Day gift. And I take out a Zales credit card. Okay, everybody with me so far? I use my Zales credit card and I put $10,000 for a nice gift to my darling. Because as Zales has told me, she's worth it. If you read the Zales credit card application, it says this: we have a purchase money financing arrangement on whatever you buy on this credit card. And so if you don't pay us on the credit card, we can just come in and get that thing back from you. Okay? You know who else does that? Nordstrom's. I know, I read the Nordstrom's credit card application. The most expensive tie I ever bought was from Nordstrom's. And so they have a lien on my tie until I pay off that tie. Now, so that's like collateral, right? It's a secured transaction. That's collateral. My tie is collateral for them having loaned me the money to buy the tie. Everybody with me so far? Contrast that with, I go to Nordstrom's and I buy a tie using my Citibank Visa card. Right? My Citibank Visa card does not have a lien because they didn't give me the money to buy the tie. Different when Nordstrom's give me the money to buy the tie from Nordstrom's. All right? Citibank is an unsecured loan. They don't have collateral. Nordstrom's is a secured loan. They got a purchase money lien on whatever you buy. Sears used to do that all the time too. I did a bankruptcy one time. A guy had purchased the bedroom set for his kid on his Sears card. Sears showed up at his bankruptcy proceeding and said, when can we come and pick up our bedroom set? Yeah, so we had to cut a deal with Sears so that the kids could keep their bed. All right. That's purchase money financing, all right? Purchase money security agreement, security
So is
transactions.
auto loans considered purchase money financing?
I don't know if it's considered purchase money, but I would say it is. The distinction being is if you go and you buy a car at the dealership, right, and they give you this document, it's about 6 feet long that you sign off on. One of the provisions of that document is a security agreement, right? And it says that, well, let me ask you this. You already know this, right? When you buy a car using institutional financing, who has the title? Not you. Right? The bank holds the title, or the lending company, whatever, or Ford Motor Company, whoever. They hold the title. So in effect, it's their car. They're allowing you to drive around in their car. Once you pay that car off in full, they send you the title. If you don't pay that car off, what happens? They come and get in their car because they have the title and drive it away. Right? And that's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about financing arrangements next. Take a break till we do. All right, peoples, let's do this. Trisha, what's the matter? Seem a little down today. What's the matter? Math got you down?
Yeah, that was awful.
Oh yeah, it was awful. Absolutely.
And
It gets better. Listen, that's it.
I'm 7 months pregnant.
Oh. Sorry.
Right?
You lose. Yeah, you lose.
No, don't start.
But listen, the idea is it truly does get better. It's just a matter of practice, right? Today was our first day. Relax, people. It's our first day. Okay? You'll be fine. All right.
You saying that makes it
I do.
much worse.
It's their
Like,
first
it's easy. Come
time.
on, you just automatically turn inches into yards. It's like these are the formulas you know.
Yeah. Practice, babe. How do you think I got here? Practice. I had no clue.
It's
I
just
still,
funny when
listen.
You're like asking for questions and it's dead silence because people are either like processing or writing frantically.
Or where's Cassandra? Completely lost it.
drinking.
Just zoned out.
Yeah.
See you later, pal. I'll talk to you on Tuesday. Yeah, I understand. All right. But again, it's just a matter of practice, right? And that's the thing. You got to understand how to approach it, and you just got to keep grinding it out. So listen, now that we've done the first 17 problems, give or take, right? 17 freaking problems. You're all freaked out. 17 problems. Go and look in the back of the book and redo them until you get it. Okay. Obviously, you can do a lot slower than when I did it. I just, I had it all preset, so we just knocked it right out. Go in the back of the book and just keep grinding them out.
Please stop.
Wow, a little blondie, huh? Patricia?
Yeah, he's like a towhead for sure.
Uh-huh. I was going to say that, Brian. I was going to say that. What do you want?
When I'm done with this.
Yeah, I'll get there. All right, let's talk about real estate financing. Now, this is what your book says. It doesn't say this about math. This is what it says about this. It says, no, it's not this chapter. It's next chapter. It says it. What it says is you got to kind of have some handle on this stuff, right? It's not like it's what you're going to do every day, but you got to have some handle on this stuff so that you can appropriately represent your client. And I believe that. The more information that you can provide to your client, the less, listen to my thinking, and it's always been this way, and I still feel that way, no surprises, okay? That's really all we're hoping for here. I have frequently told the story. I've been a lawyer for longer than I care to imagine now. I can think of one time I was in court where I didn't know what was going to happen, right? No surprises. That's what we're looking for. All right, let's talk about real estate financing. So this is what your book says, and I believe this to be true. Rarely does one purchase a home for cash, right? It's just not particularly younger people, whatever that means, I suppose, right? It's not like they're sitting on a big pile of cash. So rarely does one have cash to bring to the closing and get the deal done. If you're involved in that kind of deal, that counts for a lot. That counts for a lot because then I don't have to worry about mortgage contingencies and all that nonsense that go along with it. Shannon, you tell your husband he's going to have to pay, all right? If he wants to sit around, he's going to have to pay. That's all I'm saying. Why give it away when you can sell it? That's all that's my way of thinking. What can I say? All right, in any event. So let's see. So this is what your book says, so it must be true. It's a substantial commitment and substantial responsibility, home ownership, Your book also says, and I caution you, but I think it's true, about the need to get a pre-approval when you're talking about a buyer client. You need to get some sort of pre-approval because you don't want to waste your time showing somebody houses they can't afford, right? On one hand. On the other hand, if somebody comes into the office and you look them up and down and you see how they're dressed and you go, maybe we want to get you a pre-approval. No, it's all or none. It's everybody or it's nobody. Okay. Otherwise, it sincerely can lead you into the discrimination claim that you don't need. By the way, the question was raised the other day, and rightly so. Let's see, when Laura was asking us about, great for families or whatever, great family neighborhood, whatever. Why is that discriminatory? Because obviously it shows a preference for families. You don't want a bunch of single people roaming around there. You're looking for families. The law considers that a discriminatory statement. All right. And in any event, you got to get a handle on it too, which can be much more difficult.
What about if you say, the neighborhood is really close to the schools? Is that?
Yeah, that's also absolutely drop dead illegal. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, you get a client who comes in and they go, how far is it to the school? And you go, oh, it's a walking distance. That's fine. It's the discriminatory part comes in the advertising. Right. So you can't say, next door to the mosque. You can't say that. But if somebody asks you, you can certainly answer their question. All right. So let's see. Also understand this, and your book says this, and particularly now, it's more true than ever. The decision to rent or buy, buying property is not for everybody. And there is a huge rental market out there, and you can make money in that rental market. And particularly now, the rental market is particularly hot, right? There's so much uncertainty going around. People don't want to buy a house. Right, so the rental market is particularly strong at this point. So just something else to consider, right? If somebody is in an area and they know that they're not going to be there very long, they don't want to buy; they want to rent, right? So that decision about how long are you going to be there, that certainly factors into should we or should we not buy a house? Can we afford it? Right? There's financial concerns. Are we going to be able to obtain financing? Is our credit good enough that we can obtain financing to purchase the home? All of these things go into this question of housing affordability. There's various mortgage programs out there that your book talks about, and we'll discuss some of them anyway. Right, when it comes to mortgage terms and various payment plans. For example, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, and I'll discuss it more at some point. Let me start here. No, I don't want to do that. I want to write. Right, we talked about the concept of a balloon payment. I think that's how you spell balloon. I don't know. The idea is, right, there are mortgages that are just interest only, right? All you do is pay interest, so your monthly payments are low. But at the end of the term, you got to pay the entire principal balance. Now, maybe that's good for you because you're a betting kind of person and you think mortgage rates are going to bottom out. I don't know how much more they can bottom out, frankly. But if you think they're going to bottom out, maybe you want to put it off for a little while and whatever. I think I mentioned to you, I had a student who said, I'm moving out of state in the next 5 years. So I'm just going to do interest only. And then when I sell my house, I'll pay off the principal. And meantime, I'm putting a lot more money in my pocket each month. Right. So there are various types of terms out there. This is all negotiable stuff. And you got to be prepared to advise your client about that. Right. Obviously, you're not the mortgage broker and you don't have to advise them in minute detail, but you got to at least keep them posted. We've got FHA mortgages, we've got VA mortgages, both of which have much lower down payments and that are available to people with lower credit scores. So there is some availability out there. And again, you got to be able to advise your client, point them in the right direction. All right. The thing I'm sorry, question?
Are we in the red book?
No, we're out of the red book forever.
Oh, really? Okay, so we're in
charge. Not forever. I shouldn't say that forever, Maria. That's not true. When we talk about discrimination, housing discrimination, we'll be back in the red book, but that's not for a while. So we're in unit 12 in a big yellow book.
Okay.
All right, of course.
Are we going to learn about the FH program? FTH programs at all? Like those type of programs that they have available?
I don't know the one particular you're talking about. You're talking about CHFA? Is that the one that you're referring to?
Like first-time home buyers, like all the different programs they have.
We're going to talk a little bit about some of them, yeah, just like in a way that to like let you know that they're out there, not in any great detail.
Okay.
All right. So your book discusses, and we'll discuss now, ownership, expenses, and the ability to pay. Where's my girl Cassandra? Because there's going to be math coming up here, and so I want to just make sure everybody's on board. Okay.
I left at the right time, huh?
Glad you're back. PITI. Oh, no. I don't know. Somebody help me.
209.
209.
209.
See, I take notes, right? And I just go on my notes. I don't even know where my book is. Sorry. All right, PITI. Principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Those are the expenses that we have to deal with on a monthly basis. And that's how the bank is going to look at. Why is all this type here going on? Uh-oh. I don't know how long this is going to work. So the idea is this. When you make your monthly payment, you got to pay some toward principal, some toward interest. Chances are, in many cases, not in every case, but in many cases, you have to escrow for taxes and insurance. The bank makes you put money in escrow so that they can pay your taxes, property taxes, and your insurance. And if you think about that, I'm going to come back to this, but let me get it into your brain now. The bank has lent a good sum of money for you to buy that house, right? And that house serves as collateral for the bank. And so the bank's interest is to make certain that their collateral is protected. And if you think about ways that the bank can lose its collateral, the property taxes, right, they have a higher priority. Remember, we talked about priorities. Property taxes have a higher priority than the mortgage. Well, the bank can't then let the property tax people come in and foreclose them out of the property. So they're going to make sure your taxes are paid by paying them. Right? You're going to escrow every month into that account, and then the bank's going to pay your taxes in order to protect their interest. Another way that the bank could lose their collateral is it burns to the ground. Right? So they're going to make sure that they are protected should that happen by making you put money in escrow every month to pay your property insurance. So that if the property burns to the ground, guess who's getting paid? The bank. And they are protected. Everybody with me? Does that make sense? So when we look at affordability and whether or not you're going to be able to, frankly, make your monthly payment, the bank takes into account principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And we'll talk to you a little bit about calculations on how we work that out as well. All right, generally speaking as well, excuse me, the banks will look at your credit rating, your credit score, in order to make some determination of whether or not you're going to be able to pay it back, because obviously the bank doesn't want a loan to somebody who can't pay it back. And you've seen, and it's certainly worth discussing in brief anyway, you know, the various, you are entitled to, what is it, 1 a year, 2 a year, free credit reports. There are 3 credit reporting agencies in the United States. You can write to them, get your credit report once or twice a year. I don't quite remember, to be honest with you. And see what's going on. And if there are any issues on your credit report, you see things that you didn't expect, there are things that are inaccurate, you can at least address them. That's not right.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Is it true that so when you were talking about taxes on your home, is it true that if the bank pays the taxes for you, then the home buyer doesn't have to pay the taxes to the city because the bank is taking care of it?
Yes, that's correct.
Is that a good way to go instead of you paying for your taxes yourself?
Depends on you know what works for you. You know, it certainly is more money out of your pocket every month, but oftentimes that's not negotiable. So you can ask, listen, I have said, particularly people in your position, right, you guys, you're commission salespeople. And so maybe as a salesperson, you get a bonus twice a year or whatever. So maybe you would rather pay your own taxes because you get a big chunk of change that comes in a couple times a year. And you would much rather do that. So you may be able to talk a bank into allowing you to do that. But whether or not you have that option is kind of on them. So if you go to the bank and they go, yeah, you're going to have to escrow for taxes and insurance, and you go, I'm not doing that, they can go, okay, we're not lending you the money. It's the golden rule. They have the gold, so they make the rules. All right. Another thing that the bank will look at is your debt to income ratio. Here's how that works, Cassandra. Looking at you. This assumes that you put 10% down. Okay, you make a 10% down payment. After, excuse me, popcorn. After you make that 10% down payment, no more than, I'm just going to make sure I phrase this properly. No more than 28% of your gross monthly income can be principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. Okay, so your monthly payment of principal, interest, taxes, and insurance cannot be more than 28% of your gross monthly income. No more than 36% of your gross monthly income can go toward all long-term debt. Okay, so these are the ratios, initial ratios that a bank looks at. No more than 28% of your gross monthly income can go toward principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And no more than 36% can be all long-term debt.
Why is that?
Because they want to make sure you can pay it back. They're not going to lend to somebody who's running so thin that it's iffy if they can make their mortgage payments. Right? That's just their policy. That's the way they do their business. And I suppose there are other lenders out there that go, I'm not worried about it. But generally speaking, right, with good institutional lending, these are the types of things they look at.
So would you add the 28 and 36 or no?
Say again?
Would you add the 28 and the 36%?
No.
No? Okay.
No. All right. Your book also tells us a little bit about investment considerations when it comes to home ownership. And that's good and that's important. Try again. Investment considerations. So, for example, at least in theory, right, you build equity in your home. Sooner or later, your house is worth more than you owe on it. And the difference between those two numbers is what we call equity. And you can borrow against that equity. In fact, you can borrow against that equity and buy another house, right, as an investment house if you care to do so. At least, again, in theory, okay? We learned very differently in 2008. But it has always been thought that home prices never go down. Homes only increase in value. And so over the long haul, we're generally true in the sense that over the long haul, Oh, Elizabeth, you just came back. I typed all that stuff out and didn't make a mistake. And you missed it. I know. Over the long haul, you're going to make money.
I wasn't in front of the camera. I heard you all.
Yeah, but you didn't see me type it. I'm a little annoyed. I'll get past it. So you built equity in your home, right? And you can do stuff with that equity. At least at this moment in time, and things change, you could take a tax deduction for interest that you pay on your mortgage. Right, assuming that you meet certain qualifications and assuming that the government doesn't screw that up on you anytime soon, which is entirely possible. I'm shaking bacon my keyboard. There's some other tax benefits here as well we got to talk about. For example, we got this thing called capital gains taxes. Here's how that works. You buy a house 30 years ago for 150 grand. Time goes by, it's now worth 300 grand. 350 grand. Let's do that. You buy it for 150. You sell it for 350. That $200,000 that you made in profit, that's called capital gains, and you get to pay taxes on that. Except maybe you don't. There's a $500,000 deduction exemption. So if your capital gain is less than $500,000, you don't have to pay capital gains taxes. That $500,000 is jointly, so assuming two people own the property, I guess.
Is that over a lifetime, or is that like annually, or?
It's like a one-shot deal.
One time, that's what
I understand it, yeah. And again, I'm not an accountant by any stretch, right? But when you sell your primary residence, that's when the capital gains stuff kicks in. Now, there's also, I'm sorry, go ahead, Anas.
No, please. I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay, go ahead.
So, if primary, what about investment properties?
The investment properties are taxed differently, and you're going to have to pay capital gains. As I understand it, anyway. And your accountant may tell you differently. On top of having a lawyer before you need one, if you're doing investment properties, you need an accountant too. You really do.
If that money is rolled over to a new house, then you don't have to pay, right?
That's correct. That's where I was just headed. Yes, the rules on capital gains created an entire industry, right? This is why we have condominiums. There was a one line in the Internal Revenue Code that was put in the 80s that said that if you took the money that you made on the sale of your primary residence and you invested it in another primary residence, you did not need to pay capital gains taxes. And boom, all the condos went up in Florida, right? The one line in the Internal Revenue Code created the entire condominium industry, if you will. There's also, your book points out, you can make deductions from your IRA or individual retirement account. First-time home buyers can take money out of their IRA without deduction, or without penalty, I should say, the first-time home buyers. So that's another little benefit for you.
What was that again, the IRA?
Individual retirement account.
No, I'm saying, what did you say about the IRA?
You can take money out of it without penalty to buy a house for a first-time home buyer.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay. Let me think about how I want to do this. You come back yet? All right. I want to tell you a little bit about how financing works, okay? You don't have to write any of this down. This is me hoping to give you a little bit of perspective. This may or may not work. Somewhere out there is this font of money. So let's call it a bank that has this money. Let's call it a lender that has this money. Let's call it your mama that has this money, right? And so that lender takes the money and they lend it to you. You know that the lender is not just going to lend you a bunch of money and go, here you go, knock yourself out, go buy a house, whatever you need. Right? No. So they make the loan to you, and then you got to agree to pay the loan back, right? So you got to give to them this animal called a note or a promissory note. And we're going to talk about promissory notes at length here in a moment. So the promissory note, you could almost look at it like an IOU, right? I owe you 200 grand. Here's the terms. I'll pay it back, whatever. So far, so good. But you know, the bank, they're not just going to take your word for it. They want to make certain that you're going to pay that money back. They want to be secure that you're going to pay the money back. So they're going to ask you for some security. And that security is what we call collateral. Right? You're familiar with that. I give you $50, you give me your watch. It's collateral. So far, so good. So they want collateral to make certain that you will pay back the promissory note. Right? The way we say in my field, to secure the repayment of the promissory note. Collateral comes in a bunch of different forms. And there are two that we're particularly concerned with, and we've talked about them. So you can have real estate as your collateral. We'll talk about that in a minute. You could also have personal property as your collateral. Okay? Remember how Nordstrom's put a lien on my tie? That's personal property serving as collateral for repayment of the debt. I give you $50, you give me your watch. The watch is collateral. Right? It's personal property that secures the repayment of the debt. You with me so far? Okay. I'm going to harp on this for a moment. So, if I go out and I buy a hot tub and I put the hot tub in the backyard, right? You look at the hot tub as you're looking through the property, whatever, and it looks like that hot tub belongs to the house, but it may not be, right? It's maybe just sitting on some bricks or something. It may not be attached. It may not be a fixture. It may be personal property. If you have a lien on personal property, you could take a lien on personal property, right? We've already talked about that. I give you $50, you give me your watch, right? We call that a possessory lien. I hold your watch. Right? I got a lien on your watch. I can't destroy it. I can't sell it. I can't whatever. I have a lien on that watch that I possess. When you buy the car and the bank holds the title, it's a possessory lien. They possess the title. Okay? Make sense? But there's other kinds of liens, right? Where you can just go and like put a lien on the hot tub. That lien is called a UCC1 financing statement. UCC because it comes from out of the Uniform Commercial Code, which is the way that you put liens on personal property throughout the United States. It's uniform. Here's why I tell you that. Liens on personal property are recorded with the Secretary of State. Let's see if I can get to their website quickly enough here.
Are they also recorded with the clerk of the town?
Sometimes. And that's the problem. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Should they be? Yeah, probably. But are they? No. For what I'm going to show you, right, it'll take you 5 minutes once my freaking computer kicks in. It'll take you 5 minutes to figure out if that hot tub has a lien on it. Or what happens when I need to get the furnace replaced? Is the furnace real estate or is it personal property? Well, I say it's real estate. If they say it's personal property, then the lien shows up in a different place. And if you don't pay it back, they're going to come and take their furnace. That's going to be a problem. Come on now.
I'm just not a fan of the Secretary of State.
What's that?
They don't keep their information updated correctly.
Listen, who does?
They should.
Well, You say furnace could be a part of personal property. I thought it was attached, and if it's attached to a property, it's considered real estate.
You'd think, wouldn't you? I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying that different people look at things in different ways. And so I'm gonna help you to avoid an issue. Now, you remember we went to the Secretary of State's office, right? And we looked at the Secretary of State's office so that we could find documents that we could create our corporation, remember? Well, there's some other stuff here that's important. I suppose it's easy to find, isn't it? Let's go here with business services. Here we go, Concord, okay. See right here? It says search UCC filings. Your buyer client, let's call them, would be the debtor, right? The person that owes the money, the debtor. Sooner or later, we'll get here, and you can see, right? You can do a search of these UCC1 filings on on the seller to see if anything that they have has a lien on it, right? So here it is right here, search by debtor name. So you put in the seller name in here, and you see if there comes up, then the result will tell you if there is a lien on anything. Remember our boy in Cheshire, right? Let's take a look, see if he owes anything. Let's process it. Anyway, this is how you go about looking to see if there is a lien on property. Oh, look at that. Am I surprised or what? Let's see who's got. Look at there. OFS means original financing statement, right? You remember I call this thing a UCC1. It's a UCC1 financing statement. That's why it's the OFS thing, right? And so if I look over here, I got a financing statement. I got an amendment. Let's see if we can find out what the financing statement's all about. So he owes Kabuta Credit Corporation USA in Grapevine, Texas. That's the secured party. Oh, he's in New Milford. This is Alan Smith in New Milford, obviously, as you can see. And let's see. I got to look at the thing itself in order to figure out what exactly it is. It's not telling me. See if it has anything here. But anyway, so you get the point, right? Here, this is my search. Apparently, it's some kind of piece of construction equipment, I guess. What do I know? Yeah, but this is what the financing statement looks like. Yeah, that's the way it looks, yeah. Okay, so there you are.
They're not easy to repossess.
Absolutely true. I could tell you a story, but I won't this time. In any event, right? Just like when we did a title search online to figure out what kind of real estate liens there might be, we do a UCC search on the Secretary of State's office to see if we can find out what type of personal property might be liened, right? And whether that's of any interest to us whatsoever. I could care less about the heavy equipment that we just looked at, right? I don't claim that as part of the real estate or any such thing. But again, if we're talking about a furnace or a hot tub or maybe major appliances that have been financed or leased, right? Those are supposed to show up too. And the question is raised, aren't they supposed to record that on the land records? Well, the answer is, if there is a claim that it could be a fixture, then they should record it on the land records. But as I said, right, a lot of people should do a lot of things that they don't do. So protect yourself, right? Go take a look. So in any event, in order to secure repayment of the promissory note, it's not called a mortgage when it's in real property. It's called a security agreement. Okay, but it operates like a mortgage. Right? It contains the terms of repayment and all that stuff. Unlike a mortgage, which we'll see in a moment, you don't record the whole security agreement with the Secretary of State. You just record notice of it, which is this UCC-1 financing statement. And it's a centralized repository, as you can see. It's all done with the Secretary of State. It's not done in the individual town. So how long did it take me to look that up? 5 minutes? It's worth your 5 minutes. Your boss is going to tell you that's not your job. Absolutely true. Is it going to cause you some heartache in the future? I hope not. What did it take you, 5 minutes?
So quick question. Let's say you're buying a property and the seller has a couple of liens, but not on the property that you're buying, the other assets. Does that constitute?
That's not an issue.
Okay.
That's not
so
an
it
issue.
has to be on that property, right?
Correct. So if there is some claim that it is I don't know, some sort of thing that looks like a fixture attached to the property or that deals with the property or is placed on the property, then I got an issue, right? If it's their car or their heavy equipment or whatever the case, not worried about it. All right, so in order to secure repayment of the promissory note, the debtor, who is the person that owes the money, right, signs off on the security agreement and gives to the lender lien on the personal property. So far, so good. You gotta know how we use the terms as well. It's important. The same thing holds in real estate, right? In order to, so the bank makes the loan. I use green. That's a good loan color. Bank makes a loan to the borrower. The borrower executes a promissory note in favor of the lender. Listen to how it's used. Repayment of the promissory note is secured by a lien on real estate. And that lien on real estate is called a mortgage. Right? These are two separate but related transactions, the note and the mortgage. In other words, you can have a loan that just has a promissory note. Right? There might be a circumstance where the bank gives you 10 grand and says, pay me back. Right? And you sign a promissory note, says, I promise I'll pay you back. Promise, I'll pay you back. Right? That's an unsecured transaction. It's an unsecured loan. There's no collateral. There's no security. Remember I told you that when I was in private practice, say at my own firm, I go to the bank, I ask the bank for a revolving credit line or whatever. A revolving credit line is a loan, right? I have to sign off on a promissory note. It says, I promise I'll pay you back whatever I borrow on that line. It's an unsecured loan. I did not have to give them collateral. They did not ask me for collateral. I did not have to give them collateral. It was an unsecured loan. Okay, so it's not uncommon. It's not. I mean, in personal transactions, it's uncommon. In business transactions, not horribly uncommon. But moreover, the bank wants some security that you're going to pay them the note back. So they take a lien on the real estate. And that lien is called a mortgage. The mortgage secures repayment of the promissory note. Okay? If you don't pay back the note, or don't comply with the terms of the mortgage, then you're in default. And if you're in default, the bank who holds legal title to the property can strip you of your equitable title to the property and throw you out. We call that foreclosure. Okay, we're going to talk about all this in much more detail. Starting now. Over here. Make myself a little room. Well, let's start over here. Promissory note. Okay. I'll show you an example of promissory note and such too in time. But I want to tell you about the, as I have in the past, right? I just want to kind of give you the big picture, and then we'll look at the documents themselves, and we'll put that into some perspective. All right. So promissory note then, by law, the way we talk about it at law, right? It's a financing instrument. And that has a special legal meaning. Right? And by special legal meaning, what I mean is that note is valuable in and of itself. It can be sold. It can be bought and sold. And they are all the time. The person who owes the money, the debtor, the person who signs off on the promissory note, all right, I promise bank, I promise I'll pay back the money, promise, right? We call that person the maker of the promissory note. Sometimes we refer to them as the payor, right, which would make the bank the payee.
And I wanted to start simply by saying,
again, make sure you understand that you got the terms down. Bless you. Make sure, bless you.
Extremely rare.
Nicole, make sure that you got the terms down here quite well. Make sure you got the terms down.
Lincoln knew that when he spoke from
the deal with the promissory note is this: it's a contract, much like every other contract, right? Particularly in the sense that it is legally enforceable. Enforceable. So consider, right? I go to the bank, I get this this $10,000 line of credit that's unsecured. If I don't pay it back, they can still sue me, right? They can sue me, they can get a judgment, and then they can put that judgment against my house. So it is a legally enforceable document. It is a negotiable instrument. Negotiable. Negotiable. I think that's right. Read what I mean. It's a negotiable instrument. And that means, as I talked about just a moment ago, right, it can be assigned to somebody else. It can be assigned, it can be delivered to somebody else. It's transferable. It can be endorsed over to someone else.